Where I said I thought that the Great Recession, the global financial crisis, was the worst financial crash or panic, certainly of my lifetime, not having lived through the Great Depression. It obviously came, I think we would all acknowledge, as a surprise to a lot of bankers and regulators. And as a consequence, it caused a lot of people to do some serious introspection and reevaluation of their thinking, most notably including in 2008, the chair or former chair of the Federal Reserve, Alan Greenspan, who testified before the House and made the following statement. I made a mistake. I made a mistake in presuming that the self-interest of organizations, specifically banks and others, were such that they were best capable of protecting their own shareholders and their equity in their firms. More recently than 2008, he said, I've come around to the view that there is something more systematic about the way people behave irrationally, especially during periods of extreme economic distress, than I had previously contemplated. Those are obviously big statements and big changes from the vantage point of Chairman Greenspan, who had previously believed, as we all know, that regulators should absolutely defer to markets, which were made up, he thought at the time, of rational, self-interested actors. So I've read all your testimony today, and frankly, I wish there was more discussion of the lessons learned from the financial crisis and the Great Recession, because I think it's really important that we not go through that again, not have all that net worth wiped out, not have all that unemployment created. So I'm going to ask each of you, beginning with Mr. Allison, very, very briefly, if I may, to follow the model of Chairman Greenspan very succinctly and tell me what you learned from the financial crisis that conflicted with your earlier beliefs.
Mike, we need the mic.
Mike?
I learned that government policy, even well-intended, can be incredibly destructive. Affordable housing, which was really subprime lending, had a very positive thoughts behind it, and it was incredibly destructive and driven by government policy, including by Alan Greenspan, by the way.
Thank you, Mr. Allison. Banks played no role in lending money to people who shouldn't have been.
Banks made mistakes, too.
They're not government. Banks weren't government. They loaned money to people that they shouldn't have.
They were regulated.
I call it the fog of mirror test.
They were
Ms.
regulated.
Harris.
I learned that when you put institutions into a system where a lot of their decisions are being driven by regulation, they often behave differently than you would expect a self-interested institution to behave.
They made me do it. Dr. Cook.
I believe that the monetary authorities should have as much flexibility, as many tools as they can to fight the next financial crisis, and they don't need to be micromanaged.
Mr. Pollack.
Having for decades studied financial cycles, Congressman, I learned that this cycle was like the others, severe, but there have been other severe cycles, and I agree that mistakes are key. Mr. Greenspan made an incredible mistake in deciding to set off a housing boom in the early 2000s. That's part of the government's responsibility.
And the private sector played no role in that. I'm always amazed, I have to interrupt and say, I'm always amazed that there are ideological points of view that seek to attribute and allocate 100% of the culpability to the three parties to this. It amazes me. Did the government not catch this, not intervene? Yes. Did the private sector in the form of the banks loan money to people that they should not have? Yes. Did people seek loans that they could not support? Yes. There's plenty of blame to go around, and I just have to say that when we refuse to acknowledge that there is lots of culpability to go around here, it frankly impedes our progress in preventing it again. Mr. Barr.
I agree with the last statement you just made. I mean, what I was going to say is that I think all the gatekeepers and safeguards in the system broke. So all of our private sector safeguards broke down, the capital provision broke down, lawyers didn't do their jobs, credit rating agencies didn't do their jobs, supervisors didn't do their jobs, bankers didn't do their jobs, borrowers didn't do their jobs. We had just a disastrous consequence when all of that broke down.
Thank you. I don't have enough time left for the two of you, and I apologize. But I'm going to ask one quick question, ask you to raise your hands. Raise your hand if you think that the problem of the last 10 years is too much investigation of financial crimes and abuses. Who thinks there's too much investigation of financial crimes and abuses? Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield back the balance.
Gentleman's time has expired. The